and it begins like this. Remember how God told Adam not to eat from one tree in the Garden of Eden? God said, if you eat its fruit, you're sure to die. Unfortunately, Adam and Eve chose to disobey God. And that's when death and all the wrong things in the world began. Adam and Eve eventually died. And everyone who disobeys God, which is all of us, deserves the same punishment. But God loves us so much, He decided to rescue us by getting rid of death so we could be close to Him forever again. He did it through His Son, Jesus. It was a battle of death versus Jesus. And don't worry, kids, Jesus wins. First, Jesus had to meet death, which means He had to become a man and suffer and die like us, even though He had never done anything wrong. He did that. Then, 3 days after He died, some women who were friends with Jesus went to visit His grave. When they got there, the tomb was wide open and angels were standing nearby. One of them said, "He is risen." Right away, the women ran to tell Jesus' other disciples that the angel had said Jesus was alive. But their words sounded like nonsense. Imagine telling someone that pigs were flying or a frog had turned into a prince. They probably wouldn't believe you. Those things just don't happen. Anyway, crazy as it sounded, Jesus really was alive. And some people saw Him and started to believe it. Like Mary Magdalene. When Mary first saw Jesus, she was crying and didn't recognize Him. He said, "Why are you crying?" Mary replied, "They've taken my Lord away." Then Jesus said, "Mary." When He called her by name, Mary realized it was Jesus. Then Jesus showed up to two men who were headed to a place called Emmaus. They didn't recognize Him at first either, and started telling Him how sad they were about Jesus. They were pretty surprised when they suddenly realized that they were talking to Jesus. After the men understood He was alive, Jesus disappeared from their sight. Immediately, the same men went to find Jesus' other disciples, who were meeting in a room. While the men were announcing the good news, Jesus appeared in the room too. His disciples thought He was a ghost, but He wasn't. He showed them His scars and ate with them. They realized it really was Jesus. Jesus would appear to more than 500 people over the next 40 days, so there were plenty of people who knew the truth. Then Jesus went back to heaven by rising into the sky. People watched Him until He was hidden by a cloud. Then two men in white appeared and said, "Jesus has been taken from you into heaven, but someday He will return from heaven in the same way you saw Him go." Since Jesus took the punishment that we deserve, now nothing stands in between us and God. Anybody can become a part of God's family if we choose to believe that Jesus beat death and decide to follow Him. Even though we still have to live in this world where we suffer and die, like Jesus did, the best part is we can follow Him and be a part of His story right now. And He's preparing a perfect home for His family to live in forever. And that's the story of Jesus' rescue. So, in case you missed it, here's the quick version. Adam and Eve disobeyed. They had to die. We all do wrong things. We deserve death. God rescued us. Jesus took our punishment. Jesus beat death. He went to heaven. We can be a part of God's family. And all that is a part of God's story.
The Faithful Hall of Fame, Moses. This is Moses, who was an Israelite boy born in a time when Israelite boys were not supposed to live. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of Pharaoh. You see, Moses lived in Egypt, and the Israelites were slaves to the Egyptians. But God had a plan for His people and Moses. Moses was adopted into the Pharaoh's family and grew up in the Egyptian palace. By faith, Moses refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to share in the pain of his people rather than enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin, for he was looking ahead to his great reward. When Moses had grown up, he made a big mistake and fled Egypt for fear that he would be killed. He came to live with the Midianites for many years. One day, God spoke to Moses through a burning bush and called him back to Egypt to fulfill his plan. But Moses was afraid and didn't think he was the right man for the job. So God gave Moses his brother Aaron as a helper. So Moses went back to Egypt. He and Aaron asked Pharaoh to let God's people go. After much hardship due to the Pharaoh's hardened heart, Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt and towards the Promised Land. It was by faith that Moses left the land of Egypt, not fearing Pharaoh's anger. He kept right on going because he kept his eyes on the one who is invisible. It was by faith that the people of Israel went through the Red Sea as though they were on dry ground. And then God's people wandered in the desert for many years, even though the way to the Promised Land only took a few days. While wandering in the desert, God gave the Israelites food to eat.
What's that?
And water to drink, and was with them as they made their way to the Promised Land. God gave them many other laws and rules to live by to keep them safe and to set them apart as his own people, and used his servant Moses to accomplish his good plan. Heroes of the Bible, Jonah. This is Jonah. Jonah was a prophet. That means it was his job to tell people what God told him to say.
Yep.
One day, God told Jonah to go to Nineveh because the people of Nineveh were